Hi there, this is David Dyer again. Today we're going to talk about Galatians 2:20, where Paul says, I have been crucified with Christ. Most Christians seem to understand this verse as saying that all Christians have been crucified with Christ. They apply this verse universally to themselves and everyone else, and then they try to believe it. But let's take a closer look at this verse together. What is Paul really saying? Notice that he uses the word I. I have been crucified with Christ. Not you or not we. Usually when Paul is teaching about something that applies to everyone universally, he says we all, you, the people of God. I don't know every phrase that he uses, but not the word I. Usually when someone uses the word I, they're giving a testimony. They're talking about themselves. For example, if I say to you, I've been to New York, you understand that I went to New York. Not that everyone went to New York, we went to New York. No, I'm telling you something about myself. Many people are trying to apply this verse to themselves, but I don't believe that is the way Paul meant it. He was giving a testimony. I have been crucified with Christ. It's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. He's saying something that was his experience, not his doctrine. He was talking about a place at which he had arrived, an experience of crucifixion, which led to him being full of Christ to the extent that he lived Christ. In another place, Paul says, for me to live is Christ. Now, so many Christians are trying to believe Galatians 2:20 and apply it to themselves through what they call faith, which isn't really faith. It's just imagination. It's just trying to convince themselves mentally that something is true. It's trying to readjust their mind, do some mental gymnastics, to think something is true when their experience it is not true. All you have to do is ask the people who live around them and with them, is this person dead to themselves? Is their living saturated with Christ? When we get near them, is that what we sense? The presence of God, the peace of God, the power of God, the love of God. Is their living Christ? When Jesus was on the earth, people were attracted to him because of the atmosphere around him. He exuded the presence of God. They loved him for what he was. And Paul said, that's how I live. For me to live is Christ. It's the same thing. Look here, I'm living Christ. Now this, brothers and sisters, was his experience, not his doctrine. Please don't misunderstand me, but merely the doctrine is useless. What is important in your Christian walk right now, and in mine, is the experience of these spiritual things. Simply trying to claim them and name them and apply them to yourself through faith does you absolutely no good. What will do you good is to experience them. What will liberate you from sin and self is to experience the crucifixion of Christ for yourself, to have it applied to you, to actually have the death of Christ become real, not a theory, not a doctrine, not a belief, an experience. Christianity is supposed to be experiential. Simply trying to believe stuff will not change you. So many people are trying to believe things they read in the Bible and make believe they're true in their life when they're not really true. And this fills the church with a palpable sense of unreality. People are talking about things, singing about things, believing things that aren't really real in their lives. But look here, this verse can be real. The crucifixion of Christ can be applied to you. Paul said, I die daily. What does that mean? That means that he was being daily crucified. Jesus said, pick up your cross and follow me daily. This is something constant. This is something we need to do every day. If your life is not that of Christ, if those around you aren't sensing the presence of Christ, why not? It's because you are still living. Christ may be in you somewhere, but his life is not dominating. It's not the prevailing force in your life. It's not who people see and sense when they get near you. Instead, it's you. You can't really say, for me to live is Christ. It may be a theory, but it's not really real. It's not really true. But this death of Christ can be applied to us. It's something Jesus bought and paid for us to have, a death to ourselves. So why isn't this happening in your life? Because you're resistant, because you don't want it, because you haven't sought it, you haven't knocked and asked to die, to have Christ's death applied to you, to have an end put to you. Repentance means that we ask God to deliver us from who and what we are. Not only do we say we're sorry, but we desperately want to be different people. And how is this going to happen? Only by dying. Only the dead don't sin. We have to experience the death of Christ and the resurrection of Christ in order to walk in newness of life. People, this has to be real. This has to be true in our lives. This must be our experience. Trying to believe something doesn't make it real. I'm sorry. I know salvation is by faith, but that's another subject for another time. Simply convincing your mind of a spiritual truth does not make it real in your life. What makes it real in your life is experience. The gospel we have received is meant to be our experience, and we need to experience being crucified with Christ by coming to God and seeking him for this cross to be applied to us daily, over and over again, more and more. And by the way, this involves suffering, until we can say, I have been crucified with Christ. Brothers and sisters, we need a gospel that works, that delivers from sin, that is really true, not some imaginary, airy-fairy, pie in the sky someday when we die message that we have to try to convince ourselves of, when in our daily experience it's not really true. Enough of that. Let's get on with knowing the reality of the gospel for ourselves so that we can be delivered from sin. Yes, I do know that there are verses which use you or we, which say, for example, for you have died, and your life is hid with Christ in God. However, in no way do these verses change the message. Even though these facts are spiritually true, eternally true, they need to become our experience. As long as they remain mere doctrine, they do us absolutely no good.